Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this series of talks. It's the first time that I participate, so I'm very excited, but I'm also, oops, let me move this around there. But I'm also excited because this is the first time that I share what I do on the sidelines. I'm usually invited to talk about my research, but this time it was surprising and very exciting and challenging to think about the other aspect of my career, which is support our local community of scientists in Central America and different ways, including help figure out different ways with other collaborators and how to increase their representation, not just in the scientific literature, but also on the table where everybody is globally making decisions. And so what I wanted to do today is to talk about our community, the challenges and some of the barriers that are happening in this area, which are also common ground with other countries around the world. So this is a lot of the things that I'm going to mention are things that will going to sound very familiar uh, to scientists in other regions. And I think to kind of tell the story and to highlight some of those challenges and barriers that are faced by scientists, particularly that come from countries where English is not the first language, I'll tell you a little bit about my story and to just highlight some of the those initial challenges at the beginning of the career, and then we'll move into some of the things that are shared around and in our community. But I also want to highlight that we all have our own respective stories, right? Personal challenges and that are very unique to us. And so I don't pretend to cover or to to suggest that the other people do not find their trajectory to the career that they want to be a challenge. It's just what I want to highlight are those primarily moments or barriers that are present that make it harder for others to really be part of particularly certain scientific communities. So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Costa Rica. I'm from the country of the Pura Vida, which I'm sure many of you have visited. I was born in very rural areas in the region of the Osa Peninsula, which is a really beautiful place. And the waters around this peninsula are very important for humpback whales that come to this area from the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere to reproduce. And the first time that I actually observed cetaceans was when I was an undergrad student. I was finishing my studies and I took a summer job with an institute that was coordinating courses for the University of California and a program that is called the Educational Abroad Program, the AP program. And one of the things that we did for them was to take students to visit different protected areas, get a sense of the conservation needs and the work the scientists were doing in these areas. And one of those areas was an archipelago called the Murcielago Islands or Bat Islands, which is located in the northern part of the country. And as we were leaving the marina, and these fishing boats, shortly after that, we were surrounded by this group of pantropical spotted dolphins. And that was my first time seeing dolphins. And I think it was even my first time in a boat. And I was immediately, fascinated by these animals. They were so close that I could hear them. And that immediately kind of triggered a number of questions. What are these animals doing here? Do they spend most of their time here? What are they saying? And a number of questions that really kind of connected with my goals at the moment. I was looking for, my own niche, right? I had already worked with spiders and bats and birds and fungi and different organisms, and I knew I wanted to have a career on research, an academic career, but I really wasn't sure of the kind of questions that I wanted to ask or if there was a particular group of animals that I want to work with. And that day, it just everything clicked. And so shortly after that, I enrolled in the master programs at the University of Costa Rica and realized that I just didn't know how to go about to do research with marine mammals. There was absolutely no one in my country or in the region. There were local scientists that could mentor me or advise at that moment how to even start. And this is a time where, at least in Costa Rica, we didn't have email yet. My library didn't have research on marine mammals. So I didn't really even know, had the basic information to start with, which when, you come to a country like US where there's access to information, you realize how important, right, that is to get you started, right, to learn about the system, about methods, to connect with people, just be able to email someone and ask a question, how do I go about to do this? So I didn't have any of those resources at the time, and so I was pretty concerned. And one day, talking about my concerns with another professor, there was a visitor scholar from Portland State University, and he came and started asking me questions about, what are the things that I thought I could, I needed. And so after talking for a few minutes, he offered a scholarship to come and visit to Portland State. He and his department, there was someone working with marine mammals, and he thought that would be a great opportunity. The big issue with that is that my English was really, really bad. Well, it hasn't improved very much either, but now is much better than at that time. And so I still decided to go. It was actually a really good way to learn English, to go and sit down in classes, learn about topics. And this particular person, her name is Debbie Duffield, and I doubt that Debbie remembers me, but she made a big impact in my career. While I was visiting, the first thing she did was to give me her copy card, which allowed me to photocopy everything that was in her office. And that gave me immediate access to information. So I read absolutely everything that was available. And I come back to Costa Rica with 3 boxes full of photocopies of her office, basically. And the other thing that she did for me is that she introduced me to the Society for Marine Mammalogy. I had no idea there was a society, much less that the society had different awards and grants that were meant to support people like me to get their careers started. And so even with that, my kind of poor English at the time, she recommended to start working on a proposal. I started working, she edited, she really took the time to mentor me and showing me how to write a competitive proposal. And that made a huge impact in my life from that point forward. Months later, after I came back from this experience, I received a letter from the society with a letter of that I had received the award and a check. So that check was my first little amount of money that set me up and the path that I'm today. And all of that was thanks to having someone in my life at that particular moment in my life that mentored me, that gave me access to information, that sat down and talked to me about ideas and potential projects. And those 3 things are so important in the life of any person to be able to find their own career path. And those are things that we lack, not just in Central America, but in many other countries. So what I wanted to talk to you today is about how our community, despite of these challenges, have been growing slowly in Central America. It has become a very dynamic community that participates in a number of international activities and efforts, conservation efforts, and that is slowly contributing to the overall knowledge, not just of the region, but also in general. In spite of these number of barriers that I just mentioned, access to literature, funding, opportunities for learning how to write competitive proposals, or even publications. And the last thing I would like to talk to you today is to talk about what are the things that we could do to improve and to make sure that the next generation of scientists in Central America and other parts of the world have a community that has the skills to face the problems and the challenges that their countries and their marine mammal communities will be facing in the future. So with that in mind, let me start by sharing that as I mentioned, when I first started, it was only me. I mean, that's as far as I know today. Later, I learned that there was another person, Esther Quintana Rizzo, in Guatemala, about the same time, kind of going through the same challenges that I was going, but we just didn't know of each other. Again, there was no internet. In my country at the time, it was very limited and no email. So we kind of set up to became the first two Central American scientists uh, going abroad to get an education and try to come back and help continue training others. And today, I have to say that I feel so proud that 20 years after Esther and I left the region to work on marine mammals, our community has grown to about 15 Central American researchers. That doesn't include the number of students that all of us share. And that comes with a number of collaborations with many international scientists from different parts of the world that are participating and contributing to the training and the understanding of these marine mammal communities in the region. And on top of that, we have all of these people working in different institutions, which are all very different, but very important when we talk about research and conservation. We have some of our scientists are working in the government, others are part of academic institutions in the region and abroad, and many are part of NGOs, which are actually a collection of Central American and international scientists. And all of these institutions and groups are working together most of the time to at different regional, different geographical scales to solve the issues that we are facing today in terms of conservation. And so that's, to me, one of the most exciting moments to see our community grow. And that contrasts so much to when Esther and I began our journey, because when we started, there was really not information about marine mammals from the region. Even our own countries didn't even include marine mammals as part of the mammalian fauna of each of these countries. They were not considered important. Some of the first checklists of marine mammals are from the late 90s, or for some countries, early 90s. And those were consisted of primarily species that were expected to be in the region, which only a few of them, maybe 14, confirmed based on observations, but with big questions about them potentially having resident populations. So today, in contrast, we have confirmed that there are about 29 species of marine mammals in Central America, and the most of them actually have long year-round populations. So they're born in these waters and they stay for the most part of their lives there. And we also have learned that there are several species that migrate to these areas. The most kind of important in the sense of the contribution to the economy of the countries in Central America are the humpback whales, which we in around the late 80s, early 90s, and find out that the Central American waters were an important breeding ground for populations for whales that were migrating from Washington, California, and Oregon to Central America. And later on, we learned that Southern Hemisphere whales that feed in the Peninsula Antarctica also reach or go to Central American waters to reproduce. And this is incredible. It's not that fishermen weren't aware of the presence of humpback whales. They were, but the magnitude of the use of these animals for this habitat was not clearly understood. And once we did, there was a whole revolution. Now, the economy of many small communities along the coast of Central America has completely changed, from going from primarily dependent on fisheries to now primarily dependent on tourism and whale watching activities. And that is super important because it basically democratized the access to opportunities and resources in these communities. Of course, all that has to come with a number of regulations, which I'll mention in a moment. But these these studies and understanding of these populations and their habitat in Central America also came with the opportunity for training for local scientists and participation on the regional global scale and decision-making of protecting these animals. And that has led to recent collaborations that are more inclusive, right? So these are collaborations that involve in the publication process, not just receiving data from these scientists in Central America, but that making them part of the writing and decision making that concerns to these animals. So in this latest contribution, this comes from the SPLASH project, an initiative that many of you probably know about. It's an initiative that is based on photo ID of whales to estimate their population structure and population size. And this is a big effort that has happened to different stages. The big one happened a few years back in Splash 1, and the most recent one, Splash 2, which, by the way, tomorrow we have a meeting to kind of catch up with what we're doing. But this effort is one of the things that excites me the most, because in this list of authors, there are at least 5 Central American scientists that are involved in this report. Other efforts that have happened in Central America, while not directly involving Central American scientists, did involve the governments. For example, for many years, as many of you know, the NOAA was serving the Eastern Tropical Pacific. Their surveys were designed to evaluate the status of the Eastern Tropical Pacific dolphins that were caught in nets, tuna nets, right? And to estimate the impact of this activity. And while perhaps to me, one of the most important legacies of those surveys is that these surveys took place in the economical waters, exclusive economical zones of all the countries, or most of the countries of Central America, leaving behind a really comprehensive database of the species, their distribution, and relative abundance, not just for the Eastern Tropical Pacific, but also for the Central American waters. And that was a really important database that has informed a lot of the research that has occurred since then. And that we'll mention later on when we talk about the special issue of aquatic mammals for Central America. The other efforts that have occurred, and these are probably some of the earliest efforts of collaboration, international collaboration in the region that began in the in the late 1900s, and some of these surveys are even earlier in the 70s and 80s. But in the late 1900s, we have a lot of visiting scientists and local stakeholders working together, assessing the abundance and distribution of manatees and the wider Caribbean, primarily by using aerial surveys, which in some countries continue to be used to monitor these populations. And over the years, this resulted in the training and involvement of locals that created a number of specialists in manatees that continue today to monitor these populations and that have contributed to regional management plans, like the one that is highlighted here that was funded by the United Nations Environmental Program. And in some countries like Costa Rica, for example, some of these marine mammals have become symbols, national symbols, which grants them a special kind of status and the country conservation status, like the manatee is one of our national symbols. So participation of Central American scientists is increasing. These 3 examples that I provided are perhaps some of the most kind of old and long range collaborations. But we are also becoming more active and participating in International Whaling Commission meetings, where a lot of conservation recommendations are made directly to governments. In 2020, we had our first ever meeting for Central American scientists that work on marine mammals. Unfortunately, had to cut short because that meeting was on March 2020 when most of the countries were closing their borders. So we have to kind of cut short. So we have to kind of redo this again. But it was very exciting to finally have our own meeting, right? We South America has their own, and then Mexico has their own. Then we have the International Marine Mammal Biennales. This year happened in Australia, but that was our first kind of regional meeting. And the most recent and very exciting collaborations that we have been participating are from 2020, 2022 and 2023 in a series of week-long workshops that were organized by the IUCN, the International Conservation of Nature, that was primary goal was to identify important marine mammal areas. And in 2022, it was primarily focused on the Pacific Ocean, where about 10 IMAs, or important marine mammal areas, were identified in the Pacific waters of Central America. And a lot of that includes the habitat for humpback whales, coastal and shore populations, and oceanic populations of several toothed whales. And this year it occurred, I think it happened a couple of weeks ago in Mexico, where scientists were trying to identify important marine mammal areas for the Caribbean. So let me show you where these areas are. These are the ones for the Pacific. I don't know if you can see my arrow here, but you can see all these, a lot of the important marine mammal areas are along the coast. This is because it's primarily covering habitat used by northern Central American humpback whales and Southern Hemisphere humpback whales. And then in the Caribbean, this is very recent. They identified 46 potential important marine mammal areas. A lot of them, as you can see, are in Central America and several areas of interest that are also and practically covering most of the Caribbean waters of Central American countries. So this is a really exciting way for Central American scientists to be at the table. In the past, a lot of the conversations about conservation at the regional level oftentimes means representation from countries. And that's very important to have the experiences and the perspectives of the people that live in these countries and use their knowledge to identify areas of importance. So these efforts are extremely valuable for us. We have also been participating in a number of other efforts. There's something called the Blue Corridor in the Pacific, the ETP in this Eastern Tropical Pacific, that involves several countries. This is something that is still in the works, but in part it's largely focused along countries that are along the migratory route of humpback whales. And we also just finished a proposal that involves several countries, not just in Central America, but also in South America, that are meant to protect the Guyana dolphin, which is one of the few endemic species of dolphins for Latin America. And Central America represents the northernmost part of their distribution. And there we have recognized or identified two populations, one in the northern part of Nicaragua, which is the Cayos Mosquitos area. And the next one is found, it's a binational population that is right at the border between Costa Rica and Panama. And these two populations are highly isolated from each other and from their conspecifics in South America. So we think that as we continue to collect more data and hopefully in the future add genetic markers, we're going to be able to identify these populations as unique management units. And finally, this is a project that is very personal to me because as I was doing my PhD and throughout my career, it has always been a challenge to find funds to support my research. And I have been lucky enough to have the mentorship throughout my career to be successful most of the time to get funding for projects. And so what I want to do is my time now to kind of return to my community. And I've been slowly creating this database by using sound traps, which are recorders that you can deploy in the bottom of the ocean. I've been deploying them since 2016 in different parts of Panama and Costa Rica, and I'm working on to also do deployments in other parts of Central America, creating a large database that can be available to scientists in the region and students, so that we have a long-term database that can be used to ask very interesting questions that can help us monitor changes in underwater noise, for example, contribution of boats to underwater noise, how monitor changes over time of the presence of humpback whales or other cetaceans. And this is something that has been supported by different organizations. And my goal is that eventually this will become available to everybody. Right now, we have recorded over 3 millions of minutes of recordings. Only about 300,000 have been uploaded to this platform that is called Arbimon, and that comes with a number of tools that can be used by managers and local scientists. A lot of these tools involve novel machine learning and different ways to develop algorithms for species identification, as well as soundscape analysis. So in the future, this will be a powerful tool for anyone in Central America to use for decision making and ask interesting research questions. And this effort has gained us the opportunity also to participate at the global scale. I don't know if you guys have heard of the World's Ocean Passive Acoustic Monitoring Day that is celebrated on June 8th. This will be our second year that we participate. And this is a great opportunity to put in perspective our recordings at the global scale, right? So the goal is that eventually we'll have measures of soundscape at ocean level, across different ocean regions, and that will help us understand what happens in our region in contrast with others. We have also put a lot of effort in supporting other Central American scientists to go abroad and do a PhD or get training. That's super important to have a community with different skills that where we can support each other and coordinate efforts. So Betsy Pettis, which you can see here in this photograph, just graduated from McGill University this year, just about to receive her diploma at the end of the month. Betsy learned how to do biopsies, so she has become our expert in biopsies, and she has been now become really important member of our community, training others and supporting others people's projects. We also have 3 excellent vets. I'm highlighting here Lisette Trejos and Gabriela. Lisette is from Panama and Gabriela is from Costa Rica, who are amazing people. They have gone on their own training, seeking opportunities to learn how to coordinate stranding networks, to train others in Central America. They have broad experts in how to deal with whales that are entangled in fishing nets. Well, that's not very common. It does happen, so they have made sure that Coast Guards and other important stakeholders and our countries have the information and the skills to deal with these events. And we have a number of scientists that are continuously representing Costa Rica, Central America, and other countries, and decision-making activities such as the IMAs, as I mentioned before, and that includes Jose David Palacios and many others. And having a community that has all these different skills, it comes very important when we are experiencing this kind of revolution now, a new source of money, right, in our communities. Fishing takes risks. It can be very expensive. And a lot of communities, as I mentioned before, are turning their family business into whale watching businesses or participate in different ways in the tourism industry. And that's very important, as I mentioned, to me, as a way in which everybody has access to their resources. But without regulations, these activities can also have negative impacts on the animals. So we have been working hand with communities, with governments, to make sure that the regulations are established, that are reviewed regularly, but also that the community is part of that, right? So it's not just government, but the community who are actually the ones that are using these resources feel that they have the responsibility as well as the opportunities to participate in research and also in decision making. So there's a lot of efforts that have gone into working with communities, training, learning from others, so exchanging experiences. And a lot of that effort has been a timeshare on a much larger scale. For example, a few years back, our team of Costa Rican and Panamanian scientists, we wrote together a case study for the IWC handbook for whale watching, particularly highlighting the case of Bocas del Toro, which is a place where the dolphin watching industry has grown very rapidly, initially without regulations, and later by incorporating the community, how we all are still working together to try to regulate and make sure that everybody has access to the resources, while also supporting and helping maintain a healthy population of dolphins. And so this is, I hope you can see that we do a little bit of everything. So if you go to Central America, you have researchers there that they do their own research activities, but they also participate in education, training, and outreach. And that's very important because these scientists become the local heroes of these communities, right? They are the people that they trust. And so it's important that we are always present working with the community. And so here you see some of the examples of some of the activities that we develop. And these are not just in a single country, but we know each other, so we all participate on each other's activities. So even though we have grown in these past 20 years to a very healthy, dynamic, increase in the skills in our community, we still don't see that translated in the publication of the work. There's people in these countries that have data for 10 years that has not been published. And there are several reasons why that is. I think Jeremy Kiska really describes our community very well, and that it's an emerging region, but where the research that is happening hasn't been published yet, or a lot of that is happening, is not present yet. So therefore, there's a lot of misunderstanding. Sometimes, international scientists come to the region with the thinking that there's nothing known about these areas, but there is, and there is people working. We just need to help them to make sure to communicate their science in a global, in a much more broader scale. And so that kind of worried me a little bit when I first saw that comment. And I kind of went back to some of the journals that a lot of Latin American scientists publish. One of the most popular journals is the Latin American Journal of Aquatic Mammals. And they have two studies, two bibliometric reviews that cover different periods. The most recent one is from 2002 and to 2022. And as you can see, I hope you can see it here. If you look at Central America, and the first review that was from 2002 to 2010, there's really not a contribution of studies to this journal, meaning a lot of the studies, if there's any publication, they're not being published in this journal, which suggests that it appears to suggest that there's not publication happening here or research even happening in this region. And if we go to more recent studies, there's a little bit more for Panama, for example, but for Costa Rica and other countries in Central America, remains relatively low. When I try to kind of figure out where, okay, if there's people publishing, where are they publishing? I found that there's a lot of publications happening in high impact journals, but that's because a lot of these publications are through international collaboration. So if there are publications about marine mammals and the region, most of the time that's a paper that was led for by international scientists, and sometimes those publications do include Central American scientists. So I want to make sure that while collaborations are happening, that our scientists can also lead, right? That they can also publish their own work. And in order to do that, we needed to identify what are the barriers that are preventing from our region, despite of all this dynamic, research and outreach and training that is happening, what is preventing them from publishing their work. And the three things that we found is that language barriers is a major issue. Most international journals are in English, and the region main language is Spanish. And even in cases when they can publish and they publish in English, well, the main issue is that then the information doesn't become available to their home countries. But if they publish in Spanish, then the information doesn't become available to the general public. So there's a lot to think about, and what language to publish, if you can publish in English, and not just Spanish. The other thing is the cost of publications. Publications, especially in open access journals, can be really expensive, from several hundred to thousands of dollars. And that's seriously inaccessible for a region where there's limited resources, not just for research, but where the average research monthly or even annual salary is about that amount, right? $2,000, $3,000, which sometimes is the cost of a publication. And that's could be even the cost of a field season in these regions. So publication cost makes it very hard for people to publish their work. And finally, sometimes because of these limitations, we also find that there's a lack of training in scientific inquiry and scientific writing. So there's a lot of the work that is done is through monitoring. This monitoring information tends to be written or found in the gray literature, which has become very common. But the writing skills are something that you need to develop, and you need a lot of mentorship, and that is something that we still need to work on. So with this in mind, what we decided, Esther and I decided to propose a special issue, and we wanted to find a journal that could provide the opportunity to publish in both languages, in English and Spanish. We also needed to alleviate the costs. So the NGO Panacetasia, where I'm a co-founder, we were able to support and pay for the publication costs, so nobody had to worry about that. We also have the donation of the art by famous Uko, which made an amazing work, and we almost cried when we saw this art. And more importantly, we needed to provide a time. One thing that I need to clarify, and I've been talking about Central American researchers, the truth is that this is not their main job. Nobody pays them. Most of them are not paid to do research on marine mammals. Many of them are teachers. Some of them work for the government. Some of them have to do other kind of jobs to support their families and themselves. So they can dedicate fully their time to write a paper, which is a really long-term endeavor. So this experience basically took us almost 2.5 years, where we were able to provide enough time to a lot of the people. And we also needed to find reviewers that came with the understanding that their role was not just to evaluate the science. We wanted to publish good science, but also to provide feedback in a way that they felt encouraged, that the authors felt encouraged. So making snarky comments about their English or grammatic errors was not allowed, right? We want to make sure that the reviewers understood the limitations and the barriers that these scientists have, and if they wanted to publish in English, that we would appreciate if the reviewers could participate in helping them to improve their manuscript. And we were very lucky to have a community of reviewers that really took that to heart, and we were able to produce I think a very good representation of the work that is happening in the region. So just to give you a little bit of a summary of what the special issue manage or accomplish. We started the process in July, September 2020. We use all social media. We email directly certain scientists. We ask them to share. We try to expand our search. The invitation was general for people working in Central America, but making sure that we were looking for giving preferences to those contributions that were led by Central American scientists or where teams of international teams were including Central American scientists as co-authors. We received about 38 letters of interest and invited 33 that matched the goals of the special issue. And of those that we invited, we only received 21 manuscripts. And of those 21 manuscripts, we finally published 15 of those. And those 15 took a long time going back and forth again to make sure that we were providing the expertise and the support and regarding language and to make sure that they will stay until the end, right, of the line, that they will actually see the pay and continue working with us and the reviewers. So at the end, we have these 15, 30, 87% actually has Central American researchers involved in the publication. Only 2 of those didn't, and these are because, for example, in Nicaragua, we haven't been able to identify yet students that might want to be interested in having a career in marine mammals. So a lot of the research that is happening right now is by visiting scientists. The one in Panama is actually part of a larger team that contributes a lot to the training of Central American scientists. And everything else that from Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Costa Rica, and other Panamanian papers do include Central American scientists. In terms of the first authors, the majority of the papers were led by women. And it was basically the same number of women that are Central American and women that are from outside the region. So that was really exciting to see. So women in Central America are the drivers of the research that is happening and even numbers, right? We have women collaborating and international teams. Some papers are led by the local scientists and some are by international scientists. And these papers, this special issue covers all sorts of topics. There are manuscripts or publications on dolphins that cover topics on genetics, isotopes, distribution, population dynamics, diseases, and manatees. Contributions were on topics of genetics, distribution, spatial distribution, and physiology. And in whales, we have papers that talk about habitat use, identify migration routes, and discovering or describing the zone structure for the first time for some of these regions. So let me kind of give you a little bit of a tour of some of these papers so that it's not so broad. I know that Daryl wanted to hear about the manatees, so let me tell you some of the things that we learned about the manatees and the special issue. So there's a paper by Esark, and in this paper, the authors describe the thermal tolerance of manatees in Belize, and they find that these manatees have are at risk of heat stress in tropical areas. Machuca and Coronado, they study strandings of manatees in Guatemala, and they study basically guarantees the establishment of an implementation of standard protocols that can be used to record these stranding events in a much more efficient way. Mendes used nuclear markers and identified 2 genetic lineages of Guatemalan manatees and identified 1 genetic lineage that is unique to Central America. And this study highlights the importance of genetic tools and understanding population structure in Central America, which is one of the kind of research areas that is emerging in the region. Quintana Rizzo, my co-editor, she looked at the spatial and temporal patterns of manatees occurrences in Guatemala for a 20-year period. And they found that during this period, this population has remained relatively stable, which is really good news for manatees in Central America. Regarding the whales, the Rasmussen and Palacios described for the first time an important aggregation area for Brutus whales in the Gulf of Chiriquí in Panama, which is one of those really kind of cryptic species. They're really hard to see, but in this particular area, they're very common. My team, we have been using that network of recorders that I mentioned early on, and we were able to use it to look at sound detection before, during, and after the pandemic and the context of tour boats that are in the area. And we found that during, before and after the lockdowns of COVID, when the boat activity increases, that detection rate for these whales decrease. So this is very important information that we can use to work with the governments and the whale watchers to kind of see how we can manage the number of boats present at a given time. Duarte and Nicaragua recorded humpback whales and produced the first description of the zone of northern Central American whales in Nicaragua, and shows they found a lot of variation in the zone, which suggests that there's a lot of movement of males in these Nicaraguan waters. And Ransom, with collaborators in El Salvador, described the migratory destinations of the humpback whales that go to Salvador to reproduce. These whales come from feeding areas located in southern and central California. With the dolphins, this is one of my really exciting papers, one of my favorite papers in the journal, because it shows the power of collaboration. This is a paper that involves Central American scientists from basically all countries, and asks them to share their photo IDs of false killer whales. And the study shows that false killer whales in Central America live in small populations that have really large home ranges. And these home ranges include both oceanic and coastal waters. And there were several cases of false killer whales that are regularly seen in the area. Oviedo et al. And collaborators, they study pantropical spotted dolphins in the Gulf of Dulce, which I don't know if you know is a tropical fjord. So this population appears to have long-term residents that live in the inner part of the Gulf year-round. And Barragan Barrera and collaborators have led two papers, one that describes the genetic structure of rough-toothed dolphins in a stranding event that happened a few years back in Panama, and another study that looked at the contribution that looks at stable isotopes and also mercury and their blubber. And they found evidence for genetic diversity and also structure compared to other populations in the Atlantic Ocean. Pacheco Polaco wrote a note describing for the first time the presence of lobomycosis, which is a chronic meiotic skin disease that is found worldwide. And this is the first paper that described this disease, the presence of this disease in Costa Rican waters. Duarte and Fajardo look at the genetic structure of bottlenose dolphins in Bocas del Toro. This is a study that emphasizes the genetic isolation of this population with respect to others in the Caribbean, and how vulnerable this population is to intense dolphin watching activities. This is a place where the population is small, and there's no in-situ regulation or number of boats. There's not a limit of how many boats can be following the dolphins. And times of high tourist activity, there can be 100 boats following just one dolphin, which is not sustainable. So we're trying to work with the community to make sure that dolphin watching activities happen in a way that everybody benefits. And finally, the Ortiz Golfo, this is a very fun paper, and where they describe the historical presence of killer whales in Guatemala and a few events and where the killer whales were interacting with Brutus whales. So this collection of papers are just an example of the research that is happening in the region and the potential that there is for continuation of these studies, right? A lot of these scientists have more data, and we're hoping, and they continue to collect data, so we're hoping to have volume 2 and volume 3, get them more excited. I think for those of you that have published, whether it's a scientific paper or a communication, an article, and in a journal or a newspaper, after you put so much work and you see that in printed letters and it's published, it just gives you a sense of realization, right? So we want to maintain this spirit in the region so that they continue publishing. So I think what is also a take-home message from this special issue is that we see that there are a number of Central American scientists that are going abroad and also within the region that are acquiring a number of tools that are key in reducing the disparities and in literature, right, and research, and that leveling a little bit the ground when it comes to international collaborations. And this is really important because it ensures the inclusion of everybody on the table when we're making decisions about the future of these animals. But there's still challenges. These challenges, there's still some power imbalances happening. Sometimes, understandably, scientists from outside have their own understanding of what is important to study, and scientists in the region have their own understanding of what are the needs in their countries. So sometimes there can be some issues regarding this topic, but I think, and there are also differences in research cultures, right? So who is a co-author, who contributes, all these discussions can need to happen so that we can have fair and inclusive collaborations. And I think we are in the right path. A good example of that is the SPLASH projects that I mentioned before, the initiatives. I think this, especially the last splash, have provided the opportunity to discuss diversity and inclusion and collaborations. And I think that is, by having these uncomfortable discussions, we can get to a point where we can all contribute to conservation. And that's what we see in this report from 22 with the involvement of Central American scientists here. I also think that funding continues to be a major limitation or barrier in the region. It's really hard to find funding to do research. It's hard to find funding to go abroad and study or to participate in workshops or get training and different skills. And it's important to have this in mind when we come to this region with ideas of research. There's a really beautiful paper that by Buribalova and Rajadin from 22, where they show that successful research partnerships start with grant writing. Doing so not only reduces power imbalances, but also makes a space for meaningful conversations about existing expertise in the region, and also actual conservation priorities and the best use of the existing capacity. So I think future collaborations should consider, right, to have local scientists participating in the proposal writing process. It's a way of training them. It's a way of contributing to different ideas. And who knows, your research question might become more interesting because you are maximizing the existing capacity in these countries. One of the things that I'm doing as I'm taking advantage of my position as the chair of the scientific committee for scientific advisors and as a co-founder of Panacetasia to ensure that we can provide funding opportunities. We have these small grants research and aids, which can play a really powerful role in advancing the careers of scientists that, like me, had to start from somewhere. And these funds can serve as seed money to larger pockets of funding, opportunities for graduate school, and more. So I think having these grants can really change the game for many, many people. These grants can empower applicants in many different ways, giving them the resources that they need to address the needs, research needs in their home countries. They can help them become more competitive in writing proposal, the writing skills. Even if they don't get it, they can apply next year, and they get a really good feedback from reviewers that are meant to support them so that they can get better at writing. And Panacetasia, small grants and aid, not only funds research, but also can support those that want to go to a conference or go participate in a workshop. So anything that has to do with developmental, professional development, publication costs, or even workshops and education. Not everybody that goes in research and the marine mammal world necessarily goes into research. Some of them go into education through whale watching, through different ways of educating. So we can provide resources for that. The small grants and aid from the Society of Marine Mammalogy has a larger budget that all comes from donations. And this year we were able to match to actually reach the goal, and we'll be able to have the grant after a year hiatus that happened last year. But what I want you to look at this map. This is an applications that we received, the number of applications that we receive across the world. Notice that the countries that we get more applications are from Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. These are countries that have well-established marine mammal communities that offer mentorship, right, and support for early career applicants who are the ones that apply for these grants. Other countries, as you can see, are very light, so we don't get a lot of applications. A lot of these countries, English is not their first language. So one of my goals is to establish a mentorship program that can help us increase reception and have these applicants to be successful. For Central America, for example, we have received some applications from several countries, but to this point, only one has been funded, and that one was from El Salvador. So we want to make sure that we can increase participation and opportunities for funding, not just in Central America, but also other countries around the world that do not have resources for research. Panacetasia, as I mentioned before, is a much more local organization funded to support research in Panama initially, but now expanding to other parts of Central America. Through donations, we created the research program because we know not all Central American scientists send proposals to the society's small grants and aid because they don't have, because of the language barrier. So we allow them to submit their proposals in Spanish, and we have a set of reviewers that can read in English or Spanish, so we can provide feedback in both languages. So far, we have people from all countries, Belize and Honduras, so we want to make sure in the future how we can incentivize researchers in these countries also to apply. But we have been able the last 2 years to support 12 scientists, and we are continue to look for funding to continue supporting this grant for the next year. So I think my primary goal today is that, and I think you all agree with me, is that enhancing the career trajectory of local scientists through training and research funds allows them to address the research needs at home and can be the foundation for needed to address the conservation challenges that we face in marine mammals at a global scale. So we need more people with more skills to be able, right, to be part of the solution. In Central America, there are many challenges that we're facing. And I'm going to mention one, and I'm not saying that this is a negative challenge, but it's a challenge nevertheless. And it's that in the past few years, the whale watching industry has grown really fast, really fast. So in Costa Rica, for example, in a period of maybe, I think it was 7 years, it grew about 74%. So, and that's a good thing in the sense that there's more opportunities for the economy and more people participating in different ways through whale watching, not just directly on a boat, but hotels, restaurants, little stores, everybody benefits. But when these things are developing so fast, it also needs to be accompanied by monitoring and by regulations, by the community, right, to participating and following the norms of conduct. And so we need to make sure that we continue working together as the whale watching community, the scientific community, and the public together to ensure that we continue to maintain these populations healthy. In Costa Rica, the whales have become so popular and so abundant that the government last year declared them as of public interest, which means that any person can go there and benefit economically from these whales. And we don't know what that exactly entails, but what we do know is that having a force that is trained, whale watcher operators that have the tools to make sure that they do their activity in a sustainable way, and scientists that have the skills to measure and assess the potential impacts and make recommendations is fundamentally important for our marine mammals and the region. So how can you participate and increasing the representation of Central American scientists? There are different ways, and this is not just for Central American. This is, as I mentioned, the small grants and aid from the Society for Marine Mammalogists supports research happening in a number of countries that do not have the resources for marine mammal research. And most of these countries, their first language is not English. So this year, I would like to implement, the application process begins on June 1st. We're gonna start receiving applications soon. And my goal is to identify those applicants that are struggling and that will benefit from that mentorship that I benefited so much when I wrote my first proposal. So if there's people in the audience with writing proposal, writing experience that perhaps you retire and would like to support and help, please let me know. I'll be happy to share my email and we can talk about this. So why mentorship is so important? There's evidence that good mentorship has been shown to be successful in shaping the career of young scientists, especially from those coming from underrepresented minorities. It highlights the meaningful, right, mentorship can help mentees to be better prepared and to also develop confidence on their skills, right, as they go about their career paths. But these mentors also must take the time to understand the mentees' hardships and their challenges so that they can help them navigate the resources available to them and help them feel welcome in our marine mammal community. So if you identify with these words, please let me know and I'll set you up. And the other way that we can contribute, if you are a researcher that wants to go there to Central America and do research, here are a few things that you can do to be inclusive and to contribute to the community there. One, you can involve your local scientists in all aspects of your research, from proposal writing, fieldwork, and publication. That is a way of mentorship as well. If you are working with early career scientists and you can provide opportunities for training and statistics and experimental design and writing, if you have the resources to do so, please do. Be mindful that your priorities and research might not necessarily match the needs of local scientists, so validate these needs and support them when possible. And invite local scientists. If you're at the table on a global scale, and you're making decisions for other countries, make sure that you take the opinion, right, and consider the expertise of local scientists in those regions, because the more people, the more voices you have, the better these decisions can be. And finally, if you can donate to these small grants, please do. There are, again, both of them depend on funds from donors. And these, you have no idea how incredibly impactful these donations can be for the career of scientists around the world. So thank you very much. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them.